Hey everyone, so today we will be discussing our ethics presentation, and in my group was Belle, as well as myself, Sylvia, and we'll be discussing the ethics standards 3.8 and 3.9. So with 3.8, it lets us know that as educators, we should be able to maintain appropriate and professional relationships with our students. And by doing so, we are creating boundaries and respecting said boundaries and still being able to build relationships and connect with students just at a professional and appropriate level. For 3.9, to summarize it, since it is a little bit longer than 3.8, it basically lets us know that as educators, we should refrain from any inappropriate communication with students or any minor. That includes any type of social media, text messages, phone calls, emails, anything of that nature. And it also kind of goes into detail of talking about kind of the reasoning behind said communication and the timing. And when we're talking about timing, it could be like for how long that communication went on, or even like the time of day. It also goes on to let us know as far as, was this communication made openly, or were you more so trying to kind of hide it? It also lets us know that we should never, of course, have any type of sexual contact with any students, whether it's a romantic relationship or any like sexually explicit conversations. That includes like asking students about their sexual history or sexual preferences. We should just avoid that entire conversation in general. The next slide, we're going to be talking about expectations. And as educators, we should be able to abide by all of these standards and laws and regulations, both state and federal, also going more into specifics into our schools and as well as districts. We should be able to provide students with professional education services that are non-discriminatory and also create a safe and accepting learning environment. When we're talking about safe and accepting learning environments, we're essentially needing to protect the students' emotional and mental as well as physical well-being. And we're also wanting to make sure that all interactions with students are appropriate and transparent. And with transparency, we're just avoiding any miscommunications or just any misunderstandings in general. Now we'll go into consequences for unethical conduct. So with that, we are more so talking about kind of what follows, and it would basically be being prosecuted at a state or federal level depending on the severity of the violation. And that could mean facing jail time or anything of that nature. And just like any doctor that is malpracticing or any lawyers that aren't abiding by said regulations or laws, as teachers, we are also at risk of suspension of our license and as well as investigation, which might lead to the loss of a job depending again on the severity of the violation. And that investigation could be at a school, like internal investigation, or also just on a state or federal level as well. The next slide, we kind of cover some tips and tricks on how to abide by the 3.8 and 3.9 ethical standards. The first one is to keep communication strictly to apps that are approved by the district or school that we are teaching in. Some that kind of come into mind are like Class Dojo or Google Classroom. Now that we've gone virtual, those are kind of like the main two that I see that are used in schools. And also creating that kind of time boundary again. So you're setting these expectations of, I will respond to students from, let's say, like 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you should also create a guideline for your students on how they should respond and reach out to you. That way there's set and clear expectations on both ends, and that way everyone's on the same page. It's also important to document and keep record of conversations, just to be on the safe side regardless of anything, or even if a parent or administrator wants to reference back to a conversation that you've had with anyone, that way you have record of it as well. And then if you have to question if a conversation with a student is crossing a boundary, then you should immediately stop the conversation and report it to the appropriate authorities. And that could be your principal, that can be your superintendent, that can be, I would kind of start there. And then, of course, there's certain steps that have to be taken after that. For the next one, we are going to show some key points here as far as appropriate student and teacher relationships, and it's just a quick video as well. Let me get it playing.
We're going to review the key points of teacher-student boundaries. And to help us do that, I have an excellent film that I stumbled across in the library.
The library? You mean the museum?
The film was produced in the 1950s, but the content is still applicable to today's classroom.
Tennis on a spring day. Great exercise and a great way to think about the relationship between teacher and student. The teacher volleys information and wisdom to the student. The student volleys back questions and ultimately knowledge. But like a tennis game, the net represents a physical boundary that may not be crossed. You can be friendly with a student, but touching them is out of bounds. The net provides an emotional boundary between teacher and student as well.
I won't play the entire video, but just to kind of get the gist of things, it is linked in the PowerPoint itself, and I'll also link it in the comment box if needed. It is, of course, from the TEA website, and it is kind of more so on kind of the kind of comedy side of things, but it touches on really good key points and uses good analogies on what an appropriate relationship with the student should look like and what it shouldn't look like and how to avoid that.
Now that we have watched the key points to an appropriate student and teacher relationship, as well as discuss consequences that can happen when you overstep that boundary, I want you to take a minute to draw a cause and effect chart using at least 3 actions that were mentioned in the video, such as touching your students or flirting with them, and the consequence that can happen because of those actions. Now we're going to talk about examples of teachers not following standards 3.8 and 3.9. Miss Marie is very popular with her students. She offers tutoring after school, so it is common to see students with her after school. She often tutors Hazel after school. Miss Marie has emailed Hazel's personal email and texted Hazel. The conversations were often about general things such as work, friends, family, activities, but now Hazel is messaging her about more personal feelings that would be discussed with a very close friend. So we see that Miss Marie is not maintaining an appropriate student and teacher relationship. She's becoming close friends with Hazel, and that's not okay. You should be friendly with your students, but don't be friends with them, like the video said. It's okay for you to tutor your students after school. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes they just need that little extra bit of help, but you should never contact them with their personal emails, or you shouldn't text them. You should only contact them through school-approved platforms such as their school email. And the topic should only be about school-related things. So if Miss Marie were to contact Hazel, it should be through Hazel's school email in a professional manner and be only about her after-school tutoring. Miss Bucks is a teacher and coach at the high school in a small town. Since it is a small town, the school does not get much funding, so the student athletes must drive themselves to games and practices. Miss Bucks is not a fan of this and often drives students to the games, practices, and home. Again, this is not maintaining any sort of student-teacher relationship because we know you're not allowed to drive your students. You cannot take them in your personal vehicle or without parent consent. You cannot drive them to their homes. I know it sucks that they do have to drive themselves, but to protect yourselves, you have to just let them drive themselves because you cannot take them to the games or practices or their houses. Mr. Munsink is a fan-favorite teacher with the students. When greeting students, he often hugs the girls and high-fives the boys. One student has complained to him, as well as to the office, that Mr. Munsink's hugs or physical contacts makes them uncomfortable. Mr. Munsink has been told by the principal to stop all physical contact, but he argues that that is the way he is and he isn't doing anything wrong. Although hugs and high-fives are not sexual contact, they still should not be happening. You should not touch your students. Again, like the video said, that's out of bounds. Watch for that net. That net is your physical boundary that you have to follow. Mr. Morris is a new teacher in his high school. He has made friends with many of the staff members and invited them to friend him on Facebook. One of his coworkers decided to friend him, but became concerned when he noticed that Mr. Morris had many of the female students on his friends. When he asked Mr. Morris about it, he bragged about how he'd been talking to many of these girls. So this one is, again, just really not maintaining that student-teacher relationship because, as you can tell, it should not ever get sexual or even romantical with any of your students, and you should not have any of your students on your social media pages. They should not be on that. You should not be friends with them. And if they happen to find you, you should always keep your profile very professional. Don't be posting any pictures that'll get you in trouble. But you should never friend your students on those pages. Mr. Childress is a 12th grade teacher who spends his free time playing on a local football team. On Saturday, he was with his teammates barbecuing and drinking at a park to celebrate their teammates' win. After a few hours, several students showed up to spend some time at the park and saw Mr. Childress. When they started talking to him, he decided to let them stay with him. He gave them some barbecue as well as allowed them to drink. By the end of the night, Mr. Morris and the students were very friendly with each other. This is another one where you can be friendly with your students, but don't be friends. You should never let your students be with you at any event that's not a school event. And you should not ever give your students any type of alcohol because that is overstepping many boundaries. Now we're going to do a Jamboard, and if you will go to this link, I'll show you what to do. Okay, so when you go to the Jamboard, what you're going to do is you're going to take a sticky note and type out a hypothetical scenario that went against standards 3.8 and 3.9. Such as this example, a teacher is texting a student on a daily basis about topics that do not relate to school. This oversteps the boundary because she's texting them, so they're personal, not school-appropriated platform, and about topics that is not about school. So I want you to take a minute and do that, and then we'll go back to this. After you have finished the Jamboard, I want you to come and do this Blooket assessment. On this Blooket, you will be asked questions about things that we discussed and the standards, and it's going to be used as our informal assessment to see how well you learned it. So I want you to go ahead and go to the link. When you click onto the link, it will bring you to this booklet, again, about Standards 3.8 and 3.9, and you're just going to go ahead and go through it and play the game and see how you did. Then lastly, these are our sources and where we got our information. Thank you guys.